Hi everyone, welcome to our session today. And today we're going to speak about Lower Thames Crossing, leading the way for carbon neutral road building. So today you have me, I'm Joanna Brown, Deputy Director for Project Delivery at IPA, and I focus on the transport projects. And we also have Emily Dawson, who is Head of Benefits on the Lower Thames Crossing project from National Highways. National Highways manage and improve over 4,300 miles of motorways and major roads through England, known as the Strategic Road Network. 2/3 of HGV miles are on these strategic roads, so they really do connect the country. Now, the Dartford Crossing is one of those key routes, particularly for freight. Over 40% of road users on the Dartford Crossing are carrying goods, and a significant proportion of those have come from the Port of Dover and use the Dartford Crossing. It was designated when designed for only 135,000 crossings a day, but regularly carries 180,000. It's totally over capacity, it's congested, and there are regular accidents and delays that the team who run the tunnel and the crossing have to deal with. Those vary from being oversized loads and hazardous loads, and those need to be escorted northbound through the tunnels in particular, which causes a fair number of backlogs and unreliable journey times. It's critical to the flow of traffic in West London. 16 crossings between Richmond and Blackwall Tunnel exist, but in the east there's only Dartford. Hence the Lower Thames Crossing has been designed and is currently in the DCO stage to alleviate this stress point. As you can see from these slides, Dartford is the worst performing part of the motorway network at this point in time. It can't cope with current transport volumes, it has slow journeys, unpredictable journey times, huge daily operation to keep this moving with our operations centre at the tunnel entrance in the south, and hugely disruptive operational constraints. Equivalent to 4 weeks of closures a year for operational interventions, 3,000 incidents a year they have to deal with in the tunnel, and 3 hours of closed lanes per day because of those incidents. Less than 1 in 5 journeys are completed within the optimal journey time across this point. And almost 2 in 3 take double the amount of time they should take. So, as you can see, it's a stress point. The transport solution. So, Lower Thames Crossing will provide a reliable new link into the strategic road network, taking Channel Port traffic away from Dartford and away from those built-up areas and connecting the regional economies of Kent and Essex in a far more fluid way. 70-mile-an-hour speed limit, so high quality, free-flowing crossing, no vehicle type restrictions, so freight will be able to travel through that tunnel without any slowdown. Nearly doubles the river capacity with 3 lanes in each direction. Traffic using Dartford will be cut by almost a quarter, and that will really enable new journeys, and it will let the local traffic flow far more fluidly. The direct connection between the Channel ports, the Midlands and the North will be improved, and it's also going to connect 30% more jobs within a 30-minute commute of Gravesend, Thurrock and Havering. Really critical point really for this development. So the delivery of this complex project is going to be undertaken with a strong net zero strategy in mind. Government projects, and in particular the work that IPA does, are extremely committed to driving decarb across the whole of the construction industry. And what from a centre we see the opportunity is with Lower Thames is to have Lower Thames as one of the flagship projects, really demonstrating how this can be done. There's a whole raft of documentation and policy that has come out over the last few years, and on the right of this slide, you can see we've got a list here starting with the Paris Agreement from 2016, leading through to a series of publications through 2021. In particular, relevant here, I think, is the Build Back Greener publication and the Transport Decarb Plan and Net Zero Highways, all in 2021. The direction of public opinion is really clear in this space. Public are really expecting government to take the lead on policy, legislation, but also, everyone wants their projects to be greener. So even without policy and legislation being in the public mind, the majority of the public are now thinking about how we can build these projects without having an environmental impact. So there's also increasing precedent for legal challenge in this space, and our ability to keep investing going forward is going to really depend on our success in delivering net zero carbon by 2040. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Emily, who's going to take us through a few more details in this point.
Thank you, Jo. Absolutely. So I'm here to talk about how LTC will accelerate the decarbonisation of our industry, and alongside all of that government policy that Jo's just given us an overview of, the carbon budgets are forefront in our minds now. These are a series of 5-year windows where the government has set out very clear targets for the total emissions that our nation will produce in that period. So, for example, the 6th carbon budget requires a 78% reduction by 2035, but the 7th carbon budget, becoming increasingly ambitious, likely to require around a 90% reduction by 2040. Now, those targets have been tightening up as we as a country have become more ambitious in our journey towards net zero. And what that means for us is that we need to make sure that we're proposing and indeed will deliver LTC in a way that contributes really significant carbon savings to make sure that we are on that path. It's key not just to the way that we do business as a country, but actually the construction industry more broadly. So moving on then, let's have a look at our numbers. So on the left-hand side there, Jo, I think, mentioned a couple of minutes ago that we've already managed to take 30% out of our original forecast carbon in terms of the embedded carbon in our scheme design. Now, as you'll see from that model on the left-hand side there, the big grey roundel was our original carbon forecast, and it shrank by 30% going into our application for development consent, which is currently going through the planning process. Now, those coloured segments in the circle, they show that actually 2/3 of our construction carbon comes from steel, concrete, cement and diesel. So these are really key areas of focus for us as a programme. Now, over on the right hand side, you start to see the impact of all that government policy that Jo talked about. So the decarbonisation of transport plan. Indeed, when nuclear power stations are being built, we're very focused on creating low carbon energy. Well, indeed, what Lower Thames Crossing is going to do is support low emission cars long into the future. And indeed, from 2030, when Lower Thames Crossing opens for traffic, you'll no longer be able to buy a new petrol or diesel car that can't travel a decent distance by low carbon means. And indeed, our latest forecasts show that as a result of that government policy, the 60-year forecast for road user carbon on the Lower Thames Crossing actually reduces by around 80%. So you can see why our focus as a programme is very much on those construction emissions and making sure that we reduce those even further. You may hear us referred to as a pathfinder scheme. Well, what does that mean? It means we're absolutely shaping and steering the decarbonisation of the industry. It's very much a combination of both need and opportunity. As Jo alluded to earlier, the benefits of LTC are extensive, both locally, regionally and nationally, but so is its carbon intensity. There's no getting away from the fact that it's 14.5 miles of new road. There are two 2.5 mile long tunnels, and indeed they are going to be the 4th largest tunnels in the world, and around 50 new structures like bridges. So you can quickly see how in an industry as we are that's not yet on that trajectory to net zero, the timing is right to make sure that we bring the scale and ambition of LTC to make the market respond positively. And actually, in terms of location, that's another key opportunity for us. We are next to the ports in the southeast, And there is an ambition from the Thames Estuary Growth Board to develop a new hydrogen production cluster for the southeast right here. And of course, the government's increasingly successful Freeport policy is also on track to deliver low carbon skills across the region and hopefully attract record levels of inward investment to support billions of pounds of additional GVA for the country. So we believe Lower Thames Crossing really is the right project in the right place and at the right time. So what are we doing? Well, first of all, we started off with our carbon model, as we always do on these projects. We were quite fortunate because of the length of time that we've been developing Lower Thames Crossing for. Indeed, we've been looking after it here for nearly 10 years. Our carbon model is based on quite a mature design, and that was essential because it allowed us to understand our footprint and indeed to remove that 30% of embedded carbon that I talked about just a few moments ago. Now, what that did is that enabled us to be one of the first projects to commit to that reduced carbon limit within our DCO application. This gives us not just that commitment now, but also an ongoing commitment with our supply chain to continue to drive innovation and decrease this even further during construction. Early engagement with the market has also been central to our strategy, and indeed at least a year before we started our main works procurement process, we made it very clear that carbon and communities were our priorities as a programme. We've got incentivisation within our contract, ensuring that we invest not just in delivering that DCO carbon limit, but also in that continuous improvement during delivery. And indeed, in response to that, our delivery partners are already confirming significant additional target savings against this limit as part of the procurement process. And the final piece of the puzzle, very much around working with the supply chain. So we looked earlier on at concrete, cement, steel, plant suppliers, how they're those big producers of construction carbon. We are targeting those key areas and making sure that we do everything we can to stimulate early investment in those key constraints in the supply chain. The other big ticket item for us is going to the market for hydrogen supply. Now, what we're doing by doing that is locking in its future use, and crucially, it's giving the supply chain confidence to bring forward investment in the equipment that will be needed to use it in the future. Now, the important thing here, and I mentioned the Freeport and all the other investment in the region, is this won't just be a benefit to LTC. That low carbon technology will give our UK suppliers an advantage if they want to either export or expand to provide services all over the world. And finally, we wanted to take the opportunity to share a couple of our key lessons with you all. One, it won't come as any surprise that we believe strong leadership is essential. Now, this is not just a technical problem that needs to be delegated. That strong leadership, the ambition, that absolute commitment to making the right decision at the right time and doing the right thing has been essential. As acting early, we're reaping the rewards of giving the supply chain time to respond to our ambitions, and we're confident that we will continue to do so as we bring in those lower tiers of our supply chain over the coming months and years. And our final lesson, to be bold. People want to be part of something that is exciting, something progressive. We are all here and all working in this industry to make a difference and to do the best job we possibly can. And this is very much an area where, whatever the scale of the project that we're working on, we all have opportunities to really make a difference. And hopefully some of what we've shared today will be shared within the industry more widely and will inspire those listening to come and join us on this journey and continue to reap those benefits.
Thank you very much for that. That's fascinating. We're obviously going to need large-scale infrastructure projects going forward. So any way that we can think of as an industry to make them as environmentally sensitive as possible is vital to the industry. I should just say to everybody, just in case you're struggling to work it out, you can add questions to the chat by opening the live discussion tab at the bottom or side of your screen. We've had a couple in, but it'd be, if anybody was unclear about that, that's where you find the ability to post questions. So, I mean, yeah, returning to the thing that I just picked up on just now, it's obviously interesting that we, are in an era where we're still doing big road projects, but they are considered to obviously at this stage of the development very, they are taking carbon out of the system. But I'd be interested in terms of, the costs that you face as a public body, how you're kind of, balancing the benefits with the costs, and where people should be aware of where the costs might come, and how you kind of mitigate those.
Yeah, shall I kick us off maybe?
Go.
Sorry, Joe. I mean, you're absolutely right. But one thing for us is, I think, minimising impacts on communities, on the environment, has always been central to the scheme requirements for any project like this. So we refer to the scheme's objectives or our client scheme requirements if we are in a government organisation. And absolutely minimising that impact has always been central. And indeed, if you think about the construction process, value engineering, innovation, bringing forward efficiencies, very much embedded in the way we work and the way we go to work. So it's always a very much a key part, I think, in how we deliver infrastructure. We're always striving to be better. We talked a couple of minutes ago about how we'd already taken that 30% out. And indeed, when we went to the market, it meant that our supply chain and our main delivery partners were actually able to respond to Lower Thames Crossing proposals with additional ways to take carbon out in a way that combine that with value engineering and still meet our target cost. So it's very much something that we're finding that is people are being able to respond to positively. I think we also need to look at those costs in the context of the wider industry and indeed the economic benefits for the country, actually, as a result of our industry developing the products, the skills, to have the capabilities that they can then go and export elsewhere in the world. And I think this idea of us being able to export our low carbon construction capability more broadly is increasingly a key focus for our industry. And it's something that I think many of the big players in our industry are very keen to be a part of.
That's fantastic. I've had a question in from the audience, which is perhaps not a surprising one for a magazine that's read by contractors, which is talking about how you as a client can include incentives for contractors to meet the vision of the project. What can you say about how you may have all these great ideas and you may have a vision, but how do you contractually ensure that your delivery partner and that their supply chain helps you with that?
So I think the first thing to say is that we will be having incentive mechanisms that will mean that we can continue to drive those positive behaviours and drive that positive change throughout the construction period. Unfortunately, I can't share the specific details of them, but they will be there. I think the other area, though, that we and our delivery partners are actively working is in the way that we support our supply chain to increase their low carbon capabilities. So already to date, and indeed going into delivery, we have got a supply chain support program, and that will only build as we enter construction. Now, what that's doing is working with all tiers within the supply chain to make sure that business leaders know what is required of them to bid for either contracts on this scheme or indeed the huge pipeline of wider investment that's being planned for the Southeast. It could be something like how to manage and measure your carbon impacts by using the 2080 PAS system, for example. It could be some of the training that's available through providers such as the Supply Chain Sustainability School. So very much targeted on making sure that we're supporting companies, providing mentoring, providing the skills to ensure that you can bid for future projects. And I think that's really important because it's not just about incentives, it's not just about providing a financial motivation. I talked a little while ago about those economic benefits of being able to export low carbon capability. The incentives are just part of the puzzle, actually helping to provide the support, connecting some of the region's smaller providers up with some of the big players in our industry is really key to our strategy. And it's something that we feel is really important and indeed will be monitoring and measuring to make sure that we are seeing that increase in business maturity and carbon literacy in the supply chain as the project develops.
Great, yeah, that's really interesting, and obviously it is about more than incentives. That was a question from Phil Arrowsmith. I guess there will be some of the audience that do respond well to incentives. Is there anything you can sort of just say in general about how the process? Well, you don't need to go into necessarily specific incentives on this project, but how would you make incentives work? Uh, in terms of like reviewing progress as you go along, is there anything you can say about that? Because I think it is quite interesting.
So I think the key to it is going to be how we measure our carbon. And what we've always been very clear about is that we do want to have a clear method of measuring that carbon that will continue across those different supply chain tiers to measure against. And I think that's really, really important. And that will certainly be central to that strategy. So that, of course, everybody understands where we currently are on that trajectory and where we're trying to get to. And I think that's really important. It's going to be a really important part of our culture as we deliver the scheme. And indeed, it'll be something that hopefully we can learn lessons from other projects on. And indeed, we can share the lessons that we learn as we go through that process so we can continue to grow and improve as an industry.
Great, that's really helpful.
I'll just add to that as well. You know, the benefit for this project is we've got 3 big size delivery partner contracts. So there is going to be a healthy element of competition that it will exist between them. And, you know, other major programs have seen that benefit as well. When you've got, you know, 3 or 4 delivery partners, as a client, you can help compare against them, but they will then drive each other onwards. And I think, you know, already what we're seeing at LTC is there will be, you know, an environment of sharing between those contractors. So wins that we start seeing that drive decarb in specific areas of work on site will be shared across between partners. So,
great.
You know, it would be an inclusive environment to drive this challenge, I think.
Fantastic, yeah. So that's kind of leads us on to another question from the audience by Stacey Baker, who's asking whether the construction site works will be monitored for CO2 emissions. Your answer just now suggests that they will be. Are you able to say anything about how the responsibility, how that works? Is it that the contractors and their subcontractors would submit data to you that you would then audit, or would you be monitoring specific stuff? Are you able to say anything about how that process of monitoring actually works?
Yeah, so a lot of it will be through absolutely the supply chain members will be reporting their own data, and the reason that that's really key actually is, of course, it's not just Lower Thames Crossing that will benefit. It is all the other projects and other industries that we hope those businesses in the supply chain will be taking advantage of and growing within. So that's why using that standard monitoring measurement technique is really important, because it's something can then be transferred. And it also means there's an efficiency for our businesses in the supply chain, because, of course, what none of us want as a small business is to have multiple systems where we're recording different data in different formats. So actually using that universal method of measurement is really important to help make sure it's manageable for small business owners. And indeed, they also reap the benefits of being able to demonstrate that they really are taking their carbon credentials seriously when bidding for other bigger, larger projects in the future.
Fantastic. There's one on the planning system here. I know you were mentioning the DCO process that you're in at the moment. Do you think that, what are your thoughts on the way that system's operating in terms of encouraging, decarbonisation of large scale projects to be, to be bringing them forward? Are they bringing them forward quick enough, or should there be more thought given to how that process is expedited?
Look, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. The DCO process is quite, it's a long haul, but these are, really big nationally significant infrastructure projects generally that go through the DCO process. So, I think the planning inspectorate combined with, local authorities, and whichever department ultimately the DCO goes up to, do a really good job of coordinating what's coming through the pipeline and how planning resource can be moved around and shared around to focus on the biggest sort of ones that are coming through. So I think the DCO, the one thing the DCO does do is that it holds projects really to account in what they're designing and how they're proposing to deliver these projects. So, there's a significant public consultation period, and during that, the project has to share the emerging design and demonstrate and share the detail on their intent for environmental mitigation. It's really, really critical, because that actually, from the outset, sets out the plan for particularly local residents that are impacted and the wider communities as to how a project is then going to be later held to account on these points. During the process, a big piece of work is the environmental impact assessment, and that then forms a big part of the DCO submission. And when the consent comes out the other end, ultimately that comes with statutory requirements that a project is obligated to follow. The JR process, I guess, as well, is there post DCO consent, which is there to test and challenge whether that decision-making process is correct, and it really ensures that projects, and all of us are doing the right thing to promote environment and decarb construction. So I think there's a really robust process in place that ensures that once we start building these big size mega projects, that the intent is clear, the obligations are clear, and that the right statutory requirements are in place. I think it's sufficient at present, but it'd be good to hear if there's any other questions on that point.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying it's a good check and kind of almost an incentive on the client to get things right at the very outset, rather than a burden.
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah. We're coming to the end of this session now, I'm afraid. There are some other questions we didn't manage to get around to, but if you want to contact the speakers directly, I think that's possible, to have a further chat. In the meantime, thank you both for joining us. It was great to hear about the work being done to reduce the carbon on the Lower Thames Crossing.